Good afternoon, everyone. It is Friday, July the 17th, 2020. It is currently 12:48 p.m. Central Time. And well, I'm going to do my very best here to try to clarify some confusion, try to help everyone understand kind of exactly how things are working, because things are kind of really a mess here. I'm going to have a special message specifically to those who listen to me on YouTube and those who listen to me on Soundcloud. And I guess those who listen to the Theological Musings podcast. I mean, we have a mess. So let me try to explain. And I'm going to introduce to you a new podcast, all kinds of things here. I'm going to try to do this quickly because I'm ready for lunch. But I felt that I wanted to do something else, but I feel that I need to do this right now to try to clarify everything. All right. It all started when we were on Sermon Audio. It was very straightforward. All right. Sermon Audio, you have one page, Sermon Audio, boom, there. You could try to create little series, didn't really have a lot of control of what you could do. And of course, it was a Sermon Audio site, so you're kind of restricted on what you could talk about to some level or how you talked about it. Obviously, it's their site, they control it. That makes perfect sense. When everything moved over to SoundCloud was just kind of there at first just to capture the sermons. That's really all it was kind of there for, right? It was just kind of like it was just kind of there. And it was kind of there mainly for the church members to be able to listen. And it really wasn't even there was no real thought about how to really do anything extra. Then there was a thought, okay, I could record some different things and then be able to send like a text out to the church members and they could listen. But then like some people's phones, it wouldn't work. They couldn't download it. So none of that really worked. So then we started developing a way that, hey, I could do quote unquote, kind of like a podcast, kind of like something. And then we came up with an idea to get a standalone church app, Then everyone would have access to all of my content on a mobile device. And because we control the app, I could put anything I want I could create multiple sections and put anything I want dealing with anything, right? I mean, it's our church app. I could do whatever I want about it. And everyone would know what this section is going to cover this if they're not interested in it. And we had complete control. And there was so much good about the way it was designed. There was so much good about the way it was designed. It really was. But that company got bought out by another company. And the new company, with the way they were going to do the church app, there was nothing positive coming from it. Because let me explain. With the old church app, I create a podcast, okay? Let's say on Spreaker, you just name the platform. And then all I would have to do is grab that RSS feed, put it in our old church app, and boom, it pulled all the audio. So once I uploaded the audio to our podcasting platform, it went immediately to the church app and I didn't have to do anything extra. The new one was not going to allow me to do that. I would have to take each sermon, upload it to our podcasting platform, then go upload it to the church app. And it's like, well, no, that's making it, no, the goal here is to make it simple. So once that church app went away, then we decided we were already using Spreaker kind of as our podcast hosting site. So then we're like, okay, we're just going to use Spreaker. Now, one of the wonderful things about Spreaker is you can create as many different podcasts as you want with no extra cost. That's great. That's awesome, right? So I can have the VBC podcast where we put all the sermons. I can have the Theology Central podcast where I can talk about anything. I can have the non-Catholic podcast where I deal primarily with Catholicism. We tried some Socratic Circle. We tried hermeneutics. And some of those you're like, well, okay, let's just pull it back. Let's pull it back to some of that can just be covered in Theology Central. So, but the reason we had all of those different ones is because those different ones were going to serve as different sections in our standalone church app. So once the church app went away, I was still like, well, I think I'm going to maintain at least some of these things being separate. And you could argue maybe I should just bring everything to Theology Central, and maybe at some point I will. Maybe I will. I don't know. Still trying to figure all of that out. So Spreaker gave us the ability to create all these separate podcasts, which is good. Now, here's what happens. You create all these separate podcasts, and those separate podcasts do show up differently on all the podcast apps. Apple, Google, Spotify, you name the podcast app, Breaker, Pocket Cast, you name them, Overcast, Castbox, I think. You name all the different apps. They show up separately. So that's good. That's good because then people can subscribe to the podcast they want to get the information they want. So that's good. All right. So that's a positive thing. But Spreaker does something really, really, really weird. They allow your content to be sent to YouTube, which is good, except I don't really have any control. Like I can't even change the name of our YouTube channel. I can't even change the name, which drives me crazy because I would rather it be something else than just Victory Baptist Church because there's so much there, but I can't change the name. I hate that. All right. So that's problem number one. Problem number two, I have no control what goes to YouTube. I have no control. So everything I do, boom, it goes flying to the YouTube channel. Now, the YouTube channel's only got like 41 subscribers. We're not making, we're getting a couple of views per video. So for all practical purposes, YouTube has kind of been a epic failure. I would like to find a way to work it better, but it seems like to try to get YouTube to work, it just sounds like you got to go do a lot of work. You got to go find everybody else's YouTube page, try to get them to like you, and then you mention them, they mention you, and you got to build like this network of everyone trying to work together to help everyone else. And I don't have time to sit there and spend hours watching people's YouTube videos so that I can get them to watch my YouTube channel. And we don't even have videos. We just have the audio. So, but it's there. Okay, great. It's kind of just an advertisement to say, hey, our podcast exists. All right. So, all right. There's another weird thing Spreaker does. It sends all of our content to our Soundcloud page. And our Soundcloud page is called Theological Musings. Now remember, it was originally just for our sermons, but now everything goes there. It's kind of the catch-all. Now here's the weird thing. We have Theological Musings SoundCloud page, and everything goes to that SoundCloud page that then reverts back over to Spreaker, where we have the Theological Musings podcast. I don't even know if the Theological Musing podcast even shows up on other platforms. I've got to even investigate it because it's this weird circle, right? Like everything on Spreaker goes to SoundCloud, the Theological Musings page, and everything there goes to the Theological Musings podcast, which is on Spreaker and available on some apps. I got to figure out where it's available at. I don't even know. I've not even searched. In fact, let me do a search. I know we're live on the air. I'm going to go to every, Theological Musings is available on Pocket Cast because I just got a notification that something got posted there. All right, let me just go here. I'm going to go to under Apple. Theological Musings. All right, I'm doing a search here. Always, when I go back and listen when I'm doing something, I always realize the pause there is always too long. All right, it's not working here. Okay, hang on. All right, there it is. Theological Musings. All right, let's see here. Yes, okay. Theological Musings. It catches everything. So currently I'm looking on Apple Podcasts, Theological Musings. Everything is there. Everything. I just did sermon prep. Is all sin equal? It's there. I did a live broadcast, no worship services until 2021. It's there. I did a discussion on Warrior Nun, a show on Netflix based off Ecclesiasticus 26, 9 through 10. If you don't know anything about the show on Netflix, it's called Warrior Nun. Each episode title is a scripture reference. In this case, they use something from the Apocrypha. So Theological Musings is available. I'm assuming on pretty much all platforms. Let me go to Breaker. Okay, give me 1 second. Let's do a Discovery. Theological Musings. Theological Musings. That had to be us. That's episodes. Okay. No, it's not on Breaker, so I may have to add that. So the Theological Musings podcast is the catch-all of everything. If you want everything we do, Theological Musings will get you everything. In fact, let me go back to Theological Musings under Apple Podcasts just to make sure, see if our sermon is there. Let me go from Sunday. Proverbs 8, imperatives. Yeah, Journey Through the Bible. Yes. So it's Theological Musings gets you everything that we do. And that's weird because it never really was ultimately, it was designed for that for SoundCloud, but it ended up on Spreaker. So Theological Musings will get you everything. Everything we do, it's going to be there. And so you're going to get bombarded with everything. But if you want everything, Theological Musings, you can subscribe to that. It's really bizarre. Okay. So there's Theological Musings. Right? That's so weird. Okay. And that's connected to our SoundCloud page. So let me tell you, if you listen to us on SoundCloud, if you listen to us via the Theological Musings podcast, or if you listen to us via YouTube, you are getting everything. There's no rhymer. If I record it, it shows up there. So you're getting everything. Theological Musings, I guess that makes sense, but it really goes beyond Theological Musings. And here's the reason why, because something else happened. All right. The other day, or I don't know, maybe it's been a week now, I saw a video, and the video was how much money you can make from a podcast. Now, of course, all of our theological podcasts, obviously our VBC podcast, we have not monetized any of our podcasts. We haven't. Now, with all the thousands and thousands and thousands, I mean, we've got over 40,000 downloads just from SoundCloud alone. That's 40,000 just from SoundCloud alone. If you take all of our numbers together, I don't even know what those numbers are. Obviously, if we were monetizing those things, I could be bringing in some pretty good money. But we have not monetized any of our theological ones because we'd have to put commercials there, and I don't want it to feel like a business. The way people have supported us by sending us a check, and we do appreciate that, and that they help us support our online ministry. Thank you. So, but I saw this video about how much money you can make from podcasts. And I'm like, well, that's interesting. And so I just got this idea. I wonder if I could create a podcast, monetize it, keep it completely separate from everything we do from VBC because it's not a part of the church. I wonder if I could create one starting from ground zero, and if I could build an audience and possibly make a little money on the side. I said, now I don't want to create one that's going to require like talking about news, which would turn into, 24/7 work. But I wonder if I could just do something almost like a hobby. And it'd be like, well, I do these other things. I'll just turn on the microphone at different times and talk about them. Nothing great, no over the top production or anything, just pretty straightforward and do so. So I thought, you know what? I'll go to Anchor. All right. Anchor is the easiest way to create a podcast. I'm reading the commercial now. I had to do a commercial for them. All right. So Anchor, the easiest way to create a podcast. Why is it easy? Well, number one, it's free. Number two, it provides you, I could do the whole commercial. Okay. All right. So, but I had to record a commercial for Anchor. So, but I decided to go to Anchor and create a podcast called Currently On. Now, the goal of this podcast is pretty obvious. I'm going to talk about what's currently on. Anything, movies, TV shows, podcast, books, wrestling, sports. If it's on, if I'm watching it, I'm going to talk about it. And I'm not going to necessarily always look at it from a purely theological perspective. It may have a philosophical perspective. I may look at it from from all, just you name it. I'm just going to talk about it, right? Just like talking about anything else. And I'm not going to connect it to VBC or do anything like that. Well, lo and behold, one of the members of my church today told me, hey, I saw that, I listened to that podcast you did about that new song from Zed. Now, you may not know who Zed is, but that is okay. I'm like, wait, what? Well, I'm like, how did you hear that? How did you hear that podcast? That podcast I haven't told anyone about, because the goal was to build not to use the church people to try to build a podcast to give me a side hustle. That's not, no. I'm not going to do that. So I didn't tell anyone about the church about it. Wasn't going to mention it. And I'm like, how did they discover it? I'm like, well, I heard it on I heard it from Theological Musings. I'm like, oh, you're listening to us on SoundCloud? I'm like, why are you listening to us on SoundCloud? I'm like, no, I listen to your Theological Musings podcast. I'm like, wait a minute. How did my currently on content end up in the Theological Musings podcast? I'm like, how did that happen? And then I figured out what happened. Because the Currently On podcast, I wanted to add it to, obviously, I'm trying to add it to every podcast platform possible, because that's the way you can get numbers, right? That's the way you can get numbers. You got to get it out there. So I'm like, I'll add it to Spreaker. Well, somehow when I added it to Spreaker connect, even though it's not being produced through Spreaker, it's being produced through Anchor. They grabbed that RSS feed and they connected it with our account, right? Our account, which is, even though this podcast is not being produced by Spreaker, it's, the money going to Spreaker does not pay for the Currently On podcast. It somehow connected it with it and then automatically took that content and then sent it to SoundCloud, Theological Musings, which then sent it to the Theological Musings podcast, which is on Spreaker, and it automatically sent it to YouTube, and it automatically sent it to SoundCloud, which I've already said, which sent it to Theological Musing. I'm like, wait, how did this happen? Now, the frustrating thing is, as it doesn't appear those numbers of listens are going back to Anchor. So in other words, I'm not going to get paid for it, which is defeating the whole purpose. So I may have to delete it from Spreaker, which was what I may have to do, but then that limits it being found. So here's what's happening. If you see it showing up, I just want you to know what's going on, because I don't want anyone to perceive this in the wrong way. Currently On podcast is a separate podcast, has nothing to do with Victory Baptist Church, has nothing to do with Theology Central, has nothing to do with any of that. It's created on Anchor. That podcast is available right now on Apple Podcast. It's available on Spotify. It's available, I don't know. I would have to look at all the different podcast platforms it's currently available on. I'm waiting for feedback on iHeartRadio. I think it's available on TuneIn. It's a number of locations. It just takes forever to get. Once you start from scratch, man, you got to go through all of these growing pains. So that podcast is called Currently On. It is available on Spreaker. It's there. Now, just remember, it's not a part of us. It's just pulling from the RSS feed from Anchor. That podcast deals with things that is currently on. Let me just give you an example of the things that we have covered. Just give you an example. All right, let's go to, I'm under Apple Podcast. Okay, let me look here. Currently on, I think it'll pull up. Maybe. Maybe not. Let me see here. Give me 1 second. I'm trying to find it. When it's brand new, man, it can be hard. Well, here's the podcast. Hang on. Let me go. Here we go. Are you thinking about me? All right, here we go. Let me pull up all episodes. All right. Here are the things I've covered on the Currently On podcast. I've covered the TV show Rig 45, which is a TV series currently available on Hulu via a Starz subscription, or if you subscribe to Starz. I talked about a new album by the band Evening Hymns, not a Christian band, even though they're called Evening Hymns, not a Christian band. I talked about the 1981 movie Scanners and the famous scene in that movie that is extremely violent. I talked about Apple Music and iOS 14. I've been talking about the series Warrior Nun, which is on Netflix, and all the biblical and theological things connected to it. I talked about the song Friend by Gracie Abrams. I talked about this crazy thing available on Amazon Prime Video, which is an hour and 15 minutes of drive-in movie ads. It's crazy. I talked about Pluto TV, which now is offering 250 channels of live TV for free, and how they're owned by Viacom CBS, and CBS Viacom is putting their content on Pluto TV. I talked about the new streaming service Peacock TV, which was released Wednesday. I talked about a new show on that Peacock TV streaming service called A Brave New World, and about the 3 rules that they talk about. I talked about disaster movies in 2020. I talked about Warrior Nun and the episode called Ephesians 6:11. I talked about Peacock TV and the new show that they're showing that comes from the UK called The Capture. I talked about the new song Funny by Zed and Jasmine Thompson. And I talked about Warrior Nun, which, again, this episode that I talked about was Ecclesiasticus 26:9-10. Obviously, you get an idea what I'm talking about. Music, movies, TV shows, all of that. That's what that's about. It's not connected with Victory Baptist Church. It's just something on the side that I'm doing. I'm not even giving my name in the show because I wanted it to be separate. But it ended up all together, and that's how it's weird how that happened. If you're interested in that podcast, it's called Currently On. You can find it wherever you get your podcasts. That's all I'm going to say about it. But I just want you to understand what's happening. So let's review. All right. We ended up on Spreaker after our app went away, and Spreaker became our primary podcasting host. We had already created separate categories, so I tried to maintain those separate categories by creating separate podcasts on Spreaker. Unknown to me at the time, all of our content was going to be sent to our SoundCloud page. We were going to delete our SoundCloud page. We were going to delete it. But when you have 41,000 downloads and streams from SoundCloud, do you just, hey, you know what? Just get rid of it. Now, I don't know if I can move everyone from there over to Spreaker. I don't know, but I'm not going to throw away 41,000 downloads just because I'm trying to organize everything. YouTube is just there by default. It really irritates me because I don't really have any control over much, and we're not really doing much with it. So I almost want to delete the YouTube situation because it's not really helping us in any way. But there are some people who may be just listening to us on YouTube, so it may be. But if you are listening to us on YouTube, and if you're listening to us on SoundCloud, here's what you need to realize. You are getting everything, okay? Just everything is coming to you, all right? So just keep that in mind. I want also everyone to know that I created a side podcast just to see if I was able to create a podcast where I can make a little bit of money, more like a personal challenge, just to see if I could do it. I'm giving it 6 months to see, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. I'm not going to take away any of my time from church or take away any responsibilities because it's very simple. I watch a show. If you know anything about me, when I watch a show, I take notes. So you know how hard it is then to watch a show, turn on a microphone and go, hey, here are some of the things I saw on the show. When I listen to music, I will write down notes about the music I listen to. You know how hard it is just to turn on a microphone and talk about it? I don't have to do any prep because I already do the prep on my own. It's my hobby. So I created this just to see if I can pull it off. I don't know if I can. If I can't, it's okay. If I can, wonderful. Earn a little money on the side. That's great. I can buy some more music. You know what? Who knows? I can buy some more stereo equipment. I can buy a new pair of headphones. There's always things that I want, right? Who knows? I could save up and buy even a better TV than I currently have. That could be good, right? Now that was going to require a lot of downloads for that. So it's there. It kind of ended up inadvertently connected to Spreaker because I wanted the podcast to be available on Spreaker because I wanted it to be available on every podcast app there is. And because I guess I added it because I was signed in under my account, it connected it there. And I could possibly try to fix it. I don't know. But for now, we're going to leave it there and we'll see what happens. The good thing about having it on, the weird thing is because they added it to our account, I literally could go live under Currently On. And what I may have to do a test because if I can go live under currently on via Spreaker and it sends that back to Anchor, then I could do live broadcast and it would literally go to Anchor. I don't know if they're like it's a big circle. Like if I add something to the Spreaker currently on page, does that go back to Anchor? Well, then that would really solve one of my problems because I hate recording my podcast. I would rather do all my podcasts live. So that's what's going on, just so that you know. So SoundCloud people, if you want to be able to hear everything, the Spreaker app, or go subscribe to the individual podcasts, look, I don't care how you listen. I just want you to know what's going on. SoundCloud, YouTube, you get everything. Theological Musings people, you get everything. Everyone else, you get whatever is connected to that particular podcast. Currently on people won't hear. Well, I guess the currently on people won't hear this, but the SoundCloud people will, the YouTube and the Theological Musings people will hear this. But currently on is a separate podcast that's just designed talking about what's going on in the culture. Movies, TV shows, music, books, you name it. Just me. It's like basically you can think of currently on as I'm sitting down watching something and then I'm just talking about it. If you're interested in, and I tell you about what's on, what you should watch, what you shouldn't watch. And even though it's a secular podcast, I do throw in there if the show contains any adult content to be warned of if you don't want to watch it. And I do give you that kind of information because even people who are not Christians sometimes don't want to watch something that has certain content. So there you have it. That explains everything to the best of my ability. I know it's confusing. I apologize. Part of me wants to try to, streamline all of this and fix all of this. And I don't know if there's a way to do so because each podcast has its own listeners. And if I get rid of the podcast, then I kind of lose those listeners, or at least that's the fear. But there's the confusion. We'll see. We'll see. And again, the currently on thing may only be there for 6 months. I may end up failing miserably in that podcast. I may not succeed in trying to build something. It's kind of like just a personal challenge to see if I can do it. If I can, great. If I can't, great. And you'll notice on that one, I just literally starting from scratch and trying to build and see what happens. So we'll see. But that's what's going on. I just wanted to clarify that confusion. Trust me, I didn't want to spend all of this time doing this, but it needed to be done. So I'm going to stop. I'm going to go get food. If you're confused by anything, email me at newsif@yahoo.com. newsif@yahoo.com. Say, hey, I'm confused. And I'll be like, I'm confused with you, but I will help you. If you want a podcast on your device, just tell me which one you want. Tell me which podcast platform you're using, and I'll tell you how to get it. All right. If the podcast you want is not on your podcast app, clearly something has horribly gone wrong, and I will remedy that situation to the best of my ability. I will find a way to get it added to there. So I just want you to know that's what's happening. I know I produce a lot of content. And I know not all the content I listen to everybody's interested in. And it's one of the reasons I try to separate it out. That's why you just don't get bombarded with stuff you don't want. But if you do want everything, Theological Musings, that seems to be the podcast to go to get everything. So there you have it. All right, if you can't find it, let me know. Again, all I need to know is what you want, what podcast platform you're utilizing, and I will send you the link and how to listen to it or subscribe to it from that podcast app. All right? So something to consider. All right, I'll stop right there. Remember, the currently on is monetized because I'm thinking of it as a secular podcast, not connected. Please don't think in any way, shape, or form anything, any money that supports Spreaker that has nothing to do with currently on. It may show up on Spreaker, but it's not produced by Spreaker, not being hosted by Spreaker. So therefore, Spreaker money is not supporting it or paying for it. That Anchor is the one. And I went with Anchor because it's free, right? Anchor is free. That's why we're using that one. But Anchor has a lot of limitations that you don't have on Spreaker. So If the currently on podcast got big enough, I would try to move it to possibly one day to Spreaker and then pay for it out of my own money, not the money that goes to VBC. So I just want to make sure that that's very clear. There's no confusion. I don't want it to be misrepresented in any way. It all kind of got messed up, and it's weird the way it happens. But technically, under our one account, I could create 30 podcasts under Spreaker, which is really crazy. Nobody else lets you do that. You create more than one podcast, they're going to charge you money for each one. So that's interesting. But Currently On is not associated with Theology Central, VBC, or Victory Baptist Church. Nothing to do with it, right? It's Anchor, their podcast. They host it. Everything's connected to their RSS feed. That's what it's there for. All right. So, all right. I thought I would want to clarify that. All right. Everyone have a great day. Any questions? Email me at newsif@yahoo.com. God bless.